and welcome back to the Constitution Line by Line. I'm Don Frazier.
I'm Paul Fabrizio.
And we are talking about women's right to vote, the 19th Amendment, in this episode.
Yes, we are. We ready?
Let's hear it.
The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation.
So it doesn't matter what your sex, because this also applies to transgender, cisgender, every other gender identity that we have seen emerge in the last several decades.
Right.
So it's not just women.
Right. But the idea at the time was this applies to women.
Correct.
So the Constitution, there's no getting around it, gave men the right to vote. That at the time was originally white men and then or freedmen, and then that has extended now to former slaves and then to Native Americans, and now the push was for women.
All right, so this is the expansion of the enfranchisement.
You got it.
All right, so here's kind of the historical antecedent on this.
Okay.
Politics is messy.
No.
I'm telling you.
Shocking.
Shocked. I'm shocked. Round up the usual suspects. All right, so politics is gross. Politics is
it's corrupt.
It's corrupt. It's, who is the politician that says it's a lot like it's better not to know what goes into sausage
making or law making.
Yeah.
So
there's a very unseemly aspect to politics.
Right. And that's why it's so fun.
All right.
I like it.
Great. So, not arguing that point. But women historically had been held to a higher purpose.
That's right.
And that higher purpose was a sphere of domesticity. That the men went out and did the icky stuff, and the women kept the home fires burning. The old saying was that the hand that rocked the cradle ruled the world, right, because they were putting their values into their children.
Right.
Okay, there's even a cult of true womanhood, or this idea of true womanhood that is enters the American literature in the 1840s and 1850s, which essentially argues that women are superior. Mm-hmm. And they're superior and should be held up as models of all that is good and wonderful about not only the American character, but humanity. And that,
but therefore, they should not be sullied.
They should
by the dirtiness, the ugliness of politics.
They should not roll around in the hogsty of politics. So that was the thinking,
right,
that women were above politics. The other thinking was that women were not capable of participating in politics because they were inferior.
Right. And you sometimes wonder if they were just two sides of the same coin.
Well,
in other words, men did not want women to be involved, so therefore women were not going to be involved. We're going to justify it either by holding them to this higher standard or by saying, nah, they're just not qualified.
Just excluding them and mansplaining to everybody. So that's essentially the historical antecedent. Mm-hmm. So women during the populist era are saying, hey, as long as we're changing things, how about letting us have a say in politics? And I think it's the state of Wyoming,
yes,
where women are allowed to vote first.
Yes.
And so this kind of sets the bar that, hey, Wyoming didn't blow up and burst into flames because women are participating.
If it's good for Wyoming, it's good for the rest of the country.
And I would argue that women had to be pretty rugged in Wyoming during that time period.
Yeah, exactly.
And then so, hey, I've already had to clean wildlife on the back porch. I've already had to bury 3 kids. What's politics?
Yeah.
And so once Wyoming sort of breaks the tape, you start to see other western states say, you know what? That's not a bad idea, and that gives me a whole nother group of people to lobby.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, and so politicians are kind of going, All we have to do now is suck up to this new constituency, and we might actually be able to perpetuate ourselves in power. So this ends up leading into the suffrage movement, and the women who advocated for full participation in politics are suffragettes, and instead of suffragists. And ultimately, this leads to this. This is the 100th anniversary.
This is the 100th anniversary. Well, yes, it is. August 26th, 1920 is when it was approved. It was proposed June 4th, 1919.
Correct.
So
we're now in the century year of this amendment and its ratification.
Yeah. And just to bring it up to date, women and men voted the same, according to surveys, until the 1980s. And the election of Ronald Reagan was the first significant break in how women voted versus how men voted.
Really? So the wives were voting like their husbands?
That would be the argument. Or the husbands were voting like their wives.
That's
okay?
the cult of true womanhood.
Okay. So it depends on what story you want to take.
Sure.
But since then, there's been a clear difference in terms of how women vote versus how men vote. And that continues to this day. It's broadened in some aspects. Today, it really comes down to education. And women with college education are more likely to vote differently than their husband than women without college education. So, but
smarter the women are.
Well, the better educated.
Well,
or the
better,
more educated.
The better educated. Yeah, that's a better way to
it.
put it. Better educated women are. Number of things happen. They vote independently of their spouse.
Right.
They also have fewer children.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a declining birth rate amongst more educated women. There's a lot of things that education does for women to change their societal position.
Right, right. And in the last election, there was clearly many more women who were elected to national politics and to state politics. So in 2018, we saw just an increase in the number of women that are taking place. But that increase is largely taking place only in one political party, and that's the Democrat Party.
Correct.
The Republican Party is still doesn't have that kind of women as in terms of representation. So
why do you think that is? I'm asking my political science colleague now. How come female Republicans are not coming out of the woodworks like they are in the Democratic Party?
Well, one of the differences is that women are more likely to be Democrats than Republicans.
Why is that, do you think?
If you can answer that question, I mean, there's a variety of explanations, and it really comes down to I don't know. I mean, you can propose a bunch of things, but that
you
makes
won't be able
sense.
to stick a pin in it.
You won't be able to stick a pin in it. It could be as simple as women after they get their degrees. And again, we're talking about college-educated women where the differences are the greatest. Women who get their degrees, what jobs do they go into? Are those jobs more dependent on the government or necessary in the context of the government than jobs that men are? In other words, are men more likely to go into private enterprise?
Be entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and women are more likely to go into like the helping professions, for example, medicine.
Nursing.
That sort of doctors.
Yeah.
Medical school, the number of women is, I believe, approaching 50% in medical schools.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
In the law profession, the number of women is actually greater than the number of men in law schools.
Well, there's more undergraduate females than there are undergraduate males.
So things are happening there. So there is that difference. Beyond that, there's a difference in how you want to approach problems. And as we've seen more women elected into legislatures, we're seeing a different emphasis, a different focus. For example,
different emphasis on a different syllable. Yeah.
All right. I mean, one thing would be you look at issues like that affect people at home, minimum wage legislation, child care, family leave, also issues relating to guns. There is less of an emphasis on issues that men traditionally had cared about before: hunting, fishing, guns rights,
Energy policy.
and it's more focused on children and home now. And so which party reflects that? The Democratic Party, I think, reflects that. And that's because there's more women in the party. So, the Democratic Party had a woman nominee for president in
Correct.
2016, the Speaker of the House today, Nancy Pelosi. She's a Democrat. The highest a woman is in the Republican Party is number 3. I think her name is not Lynn Cheney, but Dick Cheney's daughter, and I apologize, maybe it's Mary Cheney. I forget her first name. But she's a representative from Wyoming, and she is number 3 in the House of Representatives. So there's just a difference in this. The Republican Party is more male-dominated, and it's older. The Democrat Party is younger, and there's a lot more females in it. The Democrat Party is much more today, has minority members in it than the Republican Party. So that's how it all plays out.
It's just different.
It's just different. That's just the way it is. And so it all goes back to what took place here. To me, the fascinating thing is, if you look at it, it's been 100 years now, how long it took for men and women to start voting differently. It took 60 years for that to happen. In the 40 years since then, it has been a really obvious difference,
Really?
Especially among college-educated people. Men and women look at politics differently. So equality has brought about political difference. So where will that lead in the future? Who knows? Can't wait to see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this nation evolves.
Yes.
Based on these.
Yeah.
All right. Next line, next time.